The worst moment of my life happened at my mother's 60th birthday party. She stood in front of 80 people, raised her champagne glass, pointed at me, and said, "Some children spend their lives taking, others spend their lives giving." Then she smiled at my younger sister. The room applauded. I sat there frozen. My husband looked down at his plate, my sister looked pleased with herself, and my mother acted like she had just delivered the speech of the century. What none of them knew was that I had discovered something 3 days earlier, something hidden for almost 20 years, something that was about to destroy every lie my family had built their lives on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Rachel Turner. I'm 46 years old. I work as a physical therapist in Ohio. I've always been the dependable one, the one people called when they needed help, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who loaned money, the one who showed up. Trust me, that was my first mistake. Growing up, there were two daughters in our family, me and my younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa could do no wrong. Seriously, if she got a C, Mom celebrated. If I got an A-, Mom asked what happened. If Vanessa forgot Mother's Day, Mom laughed it off. If I forgot to call for one evening, I got a guilt trip. I wish I was making this up. Dad used to joke about it. "Vanessa's the princess," he'd say. Then he'd wink at me. "You're the worker." Back then, I thought he was kidding. Years later, I realized he wasn't. Dad died when I was 28. A heart attack. Completely unexpected. After that, everything got worse. Mom leaned on me for everything. Doctor appointments, home repairs, bills, yard work, paperwork. But somehow, Vanessa still got all the praise. I should have seen it coming. I really should have. For years, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I had a good husband, a nice home, a career I loved. Why fight over favoritism? Then things started changing. 3 years ago, Mom began talking constantly about her finances, not because she was struggling, because she wanted attention. Every family dinner became a discussion about her money, her investments, her retirement plans. Vanessa always sat beside her, nodding dramatically. "You need to protect yourself, Mom. People take advantage of seniors. You have to be careful who you trust." The way she said it always bothered me, like she was planting ideas. Then came the first betrayal. One afternoon, Mom called crying. "I need help." I left work early, rushed across town. When I arrived, she handed me a stack of overdue bills. Turns out, Vanessa had convinced Mom to invest in some online business opportunity. $20,000. Gone. Just gone. Vanessa didn't mean any harm, Mom said. I couldn't believe it. $20,000. Vanessa never paid her back. Not 1 cent. Guess who did? Me. Not because I wanted to, because Mom was about to lose her house. I drained part of my savings, covered the debt, solved the problem. Mom thanked Vanessa for trying to help. No way. I stood there stunned. But that's not even the worst part. 6 months later, Vanessa moved into Mom's house. Temporarily. That's what she said. Temporary became permanent. Soon, Vanessa controlled everything. Mom's appointments, Mom's mail, Mom's finances, Mom's schedule. Every time I visited, Vanessa was there, watching, listening, interrupting. If Mom and I spoke privately, Vanessa somehow appeared, like magic. The whole thing felt wrong. Then came the first clue. One night, I stopped by unexpectedly. Mom was asleep. Vanessa wasn't home. I noticed a folder sitting on the kitchen counter, just sitting there, open. Inside were bank statements. I wasn't snooping, they were literally in front of me. What I saw made my stomach drop. Large withdrawals, thousands of dollars, every month, transferred into an account I didn't recognize. When Vanessa returned, she snatched the folder away. "What are you doing?" Her voice sounded sharp, defensive. I looked her straight in the eye. "What account is that?" She smiled, fake, cold. "Mom knows." That was all she said. Then she walked away. Big mistake, because now I knew something was wrong. I started paying attention, really paying attention. The clues were everywhere. Mom suddenly couldn't explain her finances. Important documents kept disappearing. Vanessa drove a new SUV. Vanessa took expensive vacations. Vanessa somehow never worried about money anymore. Meanwhile, Mom complained she was struggling. The math didn't add up. Then came another twist. A month later, I ran into Mom's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Delgado. She had known our family for 15 years. We chatted for a few minutes, then she lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She looked nervous. "Why did your mother sell the lake property?" I blinked. "What lake property?" Mrs. Delgado looked confused. "The cabin." My heart stopped. "What cabin?" She stared at me. "You don't know?" No, I definitely didn't know. Apparently, Dad had owned a small lakeside cabin. Not expensive, not huge, but valuable. Very valuable. And it had been sold, secretly, 2 years earlier. Nobody told me, not even Mom. I drove straight to the county records office the next day. What I found changed everything. The cabin sold for nearly $400,000. $400,000. I sat there staring at the screen. Mom had told everyone she was barely getting by. So where was the money? The answer arrived 3 days later, in the form of a phone call, from someone I never expected. "Rachel." The voice sounded familiar. It took me a second, then I recognized it. My father's older brother, Uncle Howard. We hadn't spoken in years. "I heard you've been asking questions." My pulse quickened. "What questions?" A long pause. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "About the cabin." I gripped the phone tighter. "How do you know about that?" Another pause. Then came the words that changed everything. "Your father never owned it alone." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Rachel." His voice sounded heavy. 12 years before he died, your father created a trust." A trust? My mind raced. What kind of trust? "One that included you." Silence. I couldn't breathe. "I was supposed to tell you years ago." "What are you talking about?" Then Uncle Howard said something that shattered my world. "Your mother wasn't supposed to have control of that property." I stood frozen in my kitchen. Every sound disappeared. "What do you mean?" "It belonged to both of you." No way. I felt dizzy. The cabin sale, the missing money, Vanessa's spending, Mom's secrecy. Suddenly, it all connected. Or at least I thought it did. But then Uncle Howard delivered one final bombshell, and trust me, nothing could have prepared me for it. "The trust documents disappeared after your father's funeral." I swallowed hard. Disappeared? Yes. Who took them? The line went silent. For several seconds, all I heard was his breathing. Then he finally answered. "I don't know." Another pause. "But I know who had access." My heart pounded. "Who?" Before he could answer, another voice suddenly appeared in the background. A woman, angry, shouting. Then the call disconnected. Just like that. Gone. I called back immediately. No answer. Again, no answer. Again, straight to voicemail. I stared at my phone. Something was very wrong. Then a text message arrived from an unknown number. Only 6 words. Stop digging if you value family. I read it twice, then 3 times. A chill ran down my spine, because for the first time, this wasn't about favoritism anymore. This was about something much bigger, and whoever sent that message was scared, very scared. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that text message. Stop digging if you value family. Family. Funny how people always use that word when they're trying to hide something. Not when they're protecting you, not when they're helping you, only when they want you to stop asking questions. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't stopping. Not this time. I drove to Uncle Howard's house the next day. He lived nearly 2 hours away, a small ranch house outside a quiet town. The place looked exactly the same as I remembered from childhood, but when he opened the door, he looked 20 years older, tired, nervous, almost frightened. The first thing he said was, "You shouldn't have come." I stepped inside anyway. "Tell me everything." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he finally nodded. "Sit down." What happened next changed my life forever. Howard disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he carried an old metal box, the kind people use to store important papers, birth certificates, insurance documents, family records. His hands shook as he placed it on the table. Then he opened it. Inside were dozens of folders, photos, letters, legal paperwork, and one yellow envelope. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. My stomach dropped. "No way!" Howard pushed it toward me. "Open it." My hands trembled. Inside was a notarized document, the original trust agreement, the one that supposedly disappeared. I stared at it. Then I read it. Then I read it again because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Dad had created the trust 15 years before his death. The lake cabin, several investment accounts, and a piece of undeveloped land. Everything had been placed inside. Mom was never supposed to control it alone. Never. She was designated as temporary trustee. Temporary. The assets were to be divided equally between me and Mom once certain conditions were met. The signature was real. The notarization was real. Everything was real. My heart pounded. Then how was the cabin sold? Howard looked miserable. Because someone removed the trust from the probate records. I stared at him. That's illegal. Yes. Silence. Then I asked the obvious question. Who did it? Howard closed his eyes and finally told me the truth. Your mother. I couldn't breathe. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I might pass out. No! I'm sorry. No! I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell backward. You're wrong. I wish I was. I paced across the room. Mom? My mother? The woman who spent years talking about honesty? The woman who lectured everyone else? No, I couldn't accept it. Then Howard handed me another document, and suddenly everything became worse, much worse. It was a bank authorization form, signed by Mom, dated 3 months after Dad died. The signature matched, the account numbers matched, the funds from the trust had been transferred into accounts controlled solely by her. I sat down again. Slowly. My entire body felt numb. But here's the crazy part. That wasn't the biggest twist. Not even close. Howard looked at me carefully. There is something else. Of course there was. There always is. What? His voice dropped. Vanessa knows. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I was shocked. She couldn't. She does. When? For years. That hurt more than anything. Mom's betrayal was awful, but Vanessa? She had known. The whole time. Every complaint, every fake struggle, every story, every lie. She knew. I wanted to cry. Instead, I got angry. Really angry. For the first time in my life. Then another twist arrived. A week later. From someone completely unexpected. Mrs. Delgado, the neighbor. She called me one afternoon. "Rachel, I found something." "What?" "A box." My pulse jumped. What kind of box? It was in my garage. That made no sense. Then she explained. Years earlier, Dad had helped her husband renovate part of their property. Some storage items got mixed together, forgotten, ignored. Now she was cleaning, and she found a box with my father's name on it. I drove there immediately. Inside were old papers, photographs, receipts. Nothing unusual, until the bottom. There sat a small digital recorder. Ancient, dust-covered, almost forgotten. I pressed play. At first there was static, then voices. Dad's voice. And Mom's. I froze. The recording was dated 7 months before Dad died. I listened and felt my world collapse. Dad had discovered financial irregularities, missing money, secret withdrawals. He was confronting Mom. "Why are you moving funds?" Dad asked. Mom became defensive, then angry, then evasive. The argument lasted nearly 20 minutes, and buried inside it was a sentence that changed everything. A sentence nobody expected. Mom said, "Vanessa deserves more than Rachel." Silence. Then Dad replied, "They're equal." Mom laughed. Actually laughed. Then she said, "Not in my eyes." I broke down crying, right there in Mrs. Delgado's kitchen, because for the first time in my life, I had proof. It wasn't in my imagination. I wasn't overly sensitive. I wasn't dramatic. My mother truly loved one daughter more than the other, and she admitted it, in her own voice. But fate wasn't done. 3 days later, another witness appeared, a retired attorney named Martin Ellis. I had never met him. Apparently, he'd worked with Dad years ago. He requested a meeting. I almost ignored him. Thank goodness I didn't. Martin arrived carrying a briefcase. Inside were copies of correspondence between him and Dad, letters, emails, notes, and one devastating memo, written by Dad in his own handwriting. The memo detailed concerns that Mom might attempt to alter trust arrangements after his death. I couldn't believe it. Dad knew. Years before he died. He knew. Martin shook his head sadly. "Your father worried about this constantly." I stared at the document. He never told me. He wanted peace. Peace. That word again. the thing people sacrifice truth for. Then Martin revealed another bombshell, a shocking twist nobody saw coming. Dad had not selected Mom as primary trustee. He had selected someone else, someone trusted, someone impartial, someone qualified. But shortly before his death, paperwork had mysteriously changed. Guess who processed those revisions? A legal assistant. Guess who that assistant was? Vanessa. My stomach dropped. No way. No way. No way. Vanessa wasn't just aware, she was involved. Directly involved. The pieces finally fit. Every single one. The spending, the secrecy, the pressure, the manipulation. Everything. And then came the biggest surprise of all, the person who changed sides. Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, Caleb. I hadn't spoken to him in decades. One evening, he called, out of nowhere. I think I can help you. Trust me, that sentence sounded suspicious. But I listened. Caleb explained that years earlier, Vanessa had bragged about protecting her future. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now, he remembered details, specific details, dates, transfers, documents, conversations, even photographs. Photographs. He still had them. Screenshots, images, records. Everything. My case was becoming impossible to deny. And then Mom announced her birthday celebration. The huge one. The party where everything started. 80 guests. Family. Friends. Business associates. Church members. Everyone. Mom planned to make it a celebration of her legacy. She had no idea. None. For weeks I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away, move on, forget everything. But every time I considered it, I remembered Dad. The trust, the lies, the recording, the years of humiliation, and most importantly, the truth. The truth deserved daylight. So I made a decision. The party would be the end, one way or another. The night arrived. The ballrooms sparkled. Champagne flowed. Guests laughed. Mom looked delighted. Vanessa looked confident, almost smug, like she had already won. Then speeches began. Mom stood, raised her glass, and delivered the speech. The one that humiliated me. The one I can still hear. Some children spend their lives taking. Applause. Others spend their lives giving. More applause. Then she smiled at Vanessa. The room erupted. That was her victory lap. Or so she thought. I stood slowly. My heart hammered. The room quieted. Mom frowned. Rachel? I looked around. 80 faces. Watching. Waiting. I took a breath. Then said, I brought a gift. Mom smiled. How thoughtful. I nodded. It is. Then I connected my phone to the projector. The room froze. Vanessa immediately stood up. What are you doing? I ignored her. The first image appeared. The trust. Dad's signature. The room became silent. Then came financial records, transfer histories, property documents, witness statements. The silence grew heavier. Mom's smile disappeared. Vanessa looked pale. Then came the recording. Dad's voice filled the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Then Mom's voice echoed through the speakers. Vanessa deserves more than Rachel. Gasps. Everywhere. Mom looked horrified. Vanessa looked sick. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The final evidence appeared. The altered paperwork, the trust modifications, the signatures, the dates, the connections, everything. And then Caleb stood up, unexpectedly. He walked forward, calm, steady, and confirmed everything. Every detail, every conversation, every lie. Then Martin stood, the attorney, and verified the legal history. Then Howard stood and confirmed the original trust. Witness after witness, truth after truth. The entire structure collapsed, right there, in public. Mom sat down, speechless. Vanessa began crying, but nobody rushed to comfort her, because now everyone understood. Finally. Mom tried to speak. Nothing came out. Then she whispered, "I was protecting her." I looked at her, really looked at her, and answered honestly, "No." Silence. You were choosing her. Nobody forgot that moment. Nobody. The legal fallout lasted months. The trust was restored. The transactions were investigated. Funds were recovered. Not all of them, but enough. Vanessa faced civil penalties, massive ones. Mom lost control of every remaining asset. Court-appointed oversight replaced her authority. The consequences were real and deserved. But here's what surprised me. The greatest victory wasn't financial. It wasn't legal. It wasn't public. It was personal. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped chasing my mother's approval. I stopped trying to earn love that should have been given freely. I stopped competing in a game designed for me to lose. That changed everything. Months later, I sold my share of the lake property, not because I needed money, because I needed peace. I used part of the proceeds to create a scholarship in Dad's name for students entering skilled trades, the kind of work Dad respected, the kind of work that built real lives. People cried at the dedication ceremony, including me. As for Mom, we barely speak. That sounds sad. Maybe it is, but sometimes distance is healthier than pretending. Vanessa moved away. Last I heard, she was rebuilding her life. I genuinely hope she succeeds. Just honestly this time. As for me, I finally feel free. Not because I won, because I stopped carrying things that were never mine. The blame, the guilt, the comparison, the need to prove my worth. Those burdens belonged to other people, not me. Sometimes I visit Dad's memorial bench at the lake. I sit quietly, watch the water, and think about everything that happened. One afternoon, I brought fresh flowers. As I stood there, a breeze moved across the lake, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the polite smile, not the survival smile, a real one. Because after decades of lies, the truth finally had a home. And so did I. The end.